He's the president of the Bonsai Society of Winnipeg. The group has been steadily growing in numbers over the past few years. This weekend, they're going to be coming together to show off their hard work. And this is where I tell you to please watch YouTube this morning and just click on there because you want to see the hard work that he's brought in studio. There's a couple of trees here. Hi there, Scott. How are you?
I'm awesome, thanks.
Did you enjoy hearing Little Karate Kid?
That was great. Danielson!
It was also one of my favorite movies. I had a poster of Ralph Macchio in my room.
As did many, I'm sure.
For years.
Yeah.
I cannot bonsai like this, though. Just why don't you describe? Let's just get right in. What have you brought in for us today?
So I brought in for you a good example. There's two trees in front of us, and one of them is a little bit more refined, and the other one is kind of just on the verge of starting its bonsai journey. The first one's a tropical tree. So what we do in the club is try and help people learn how to grow bonsai in Winnipeg with our harsh climate. Because, I mean, let's face it, we don't live in Florida. So we've got kind of 3-4 months of solid growing every year. And then we've got to figure out what to do with these trees for the winter.
So this one's a tropical tree in front of you? Just maybe point for the viewers.
Absolutely.
Here.
This is a tropical tree. It's a ficus.
Great.
So in the winter, this tree can't take our cold temperatures, so it comes in the house with me and goes under grow lights. So that's one kind of technique that we use to winter our trees. The second tree, the taller one, is a tamarack, and that's just, as I said, starting its bonsai journey. So it's a very young, and I mean, it's an older tree. It's probably 75 years old, but the tree itself has only been a bonsai for kind of 2 or 3 years.
It's probably 75 years old. Where did you get it?
So we collect these trees in places where it's legal to do so.
Yes.
So provincial trunk highways and places like that where you can go and collect plants. But this tree came from a bog where the growth is very stunted. And I mean, tamarack doesn't really necessarily like to be sitting in water, but they're hardy enough that they grow there, and all the other trees can't. So, in a bog or something similar like that, very swamp-like conditions, there are lots of tamarack, but their growth is very stunted. They grow very little every year. So it's a good kind of place for us to get very old trees that that aren't 30 feet tall.
Now, I'll come back to the specimens, how they're planted, and describe for the radio listeners as well, sort of the shape of them and how you do this. But I want to ask you a little bit about your hobby.
Yes.
So when you were watching the scene in Karate Kid, take us back to young little Scott. What were you thinking? What is it that got you hooked?
You know what? I've always been fascinated with miniatures. My brother had a train set growing up, and I just love the little buildings and the little people. And I've always kind of, I'm an artist, so I always drew things, and I love drawing little tiny versions of things. So seeing the Karate Kid and seeing these little fascinating trees to me already, I got the idea that they kind of represented a massive tree that you'd see off in the distance, but they were tiny, and you could, potentially have them in your living room. Now, that's not where these trees should be, but right away it fascinated me.
And so what was your first bonsai?
Well, fast forward, 20 years and I've got kids and I've stopped playing sports because I'm getting old and my joints are, not what they used to be kind of thing. So
I feel that. Yeah.
There you go. So looking at hobbies and my brother had kind of connected with the Bonsai Society at the time and I had, bought a couple of small plants that I was kind of reading about what the techniques were to kind of minimize the size of things.
And what kind were they? Your first ones?
Well, I would say probably the first one would have been something like this, a tropical, a ficus, because, it was something I wanted to keep in the house.
And just so people know, when we're going on with this story, like a ficus is, you can find those even like at the grocery store or wherever,
Sure.
like they're just little pretty common trees with small green leaves.
Yep.
And they often, they have tons and tons of branches. So you started with something like that you started with?
Something similar, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And why? Are they forgiving when you're snipping, or why are they good beginner plants?
You know what? The whole thing is you're trying to create the illusion of a massive tree, but in very small form. So, there's certain species that work a lot better. So the smaller the leaves, obviously the easier a technique you're going to have, or the easier time you're going to have creating that illusion of a giant tree. So something like a Manitoba maple that has, tree leaves that are as big as my palm is going to be a lot more difficult to create the illusion than something like a ficus that, you can get the leaves to be half an inch in size.
Got it. How many bonsais do you have now?
I've reduced my collection
Okay.
to make it a little bit more manageable. So I'm down to about 50 trees.
50 of them?
Yes.
That's a ton of work.
Well, it is, but having said that, not all of them are finished bonsai. I'd say I have maybe 10 that I would consider close to the end of their, journey as the style that I want them to be in. And the rest of them are all somewhere along the lines of, on their way there. So
What do you feel like when you're doing your hobby, when you're snipping, when you're creating, shaping, and in your head, you're going somewhere, it's going to take years. These are live plants that need to be cared for, these trees rather. What do you feel like when you're doing it?
So that's the other thing that happens is as you start out, I mean, what I think of as a bonsai now is completely different than what I thought of as a bonsai, what I wanted in my collection when I first started. You learn a lot as you go along, and you kind of make lots of mistakes. I probably killed more trees than anybody else in our society, but that's kind of one of the ways that you learn. And there's a bit of a connection that it's an art form that's never really finished because even if you get something to the level where you're very happy with the way it looks, the tree is also responding and growing, and you kind of have to. It's never quite finished because the tree does keep adjusting itself, and you have to keep it in line.
The way that you've presented these specimens is beautiful. So now I'm back to describing these here. And I love this because on YouTube, you almost look like you're hiding behind one of them. Your face is covered by the tree. Okay, so we've got long, tall sort of pedestals. They're gorgeous. They're like a deep sort of dark wood. And then you've got these shallow pottery dishes covered in moss at the bottom. The one in front of me, this specimen has a big curved root, and it's wired to be shaped that way. And then, as you said, the top is just beautifully bonsaied. So it's sparse, and yet the shape is clear, and it's almost flowing over. Now, I'm leaning over to look at the other one because your other design, there's two pots. One of them is a pot with a tree and moss, and then it's kind of got that, this is the ficus now, it's got that nubby, thick, sort of stumpy looking root that comes out trunk, and it bends over. And it's almost leaning over to relate to something sitting underneath it, which is a tiny little pottery shallow pot with moss and a big rock. What's the relationship or the story that you have on display there?
So in a traditional bonsai display, you might have a companion plant or something else that kind of tells the story of the bonsai. And in Japan, a companion plant is a common thing that would be displayed alongside a tree. And generally what that would be is something that was collected on the site where the tree was collected, and the family kind of cherishes that little plant as a reminder of where the tree came from. So in this case, what I've got is that the tree is a style, it's called a cascade, which sort of represents what a tree would look like growing out of the side of a cliff face or a rock or in the mountains.
Yep.
So to kind of continue on with that story, the companion I've decided for with this is a little another Japanese artist called suiseki, which is a viewing stone, or in a rough translation is a water stone. So the stone that I've got here in the little pot kind of relays a mountainscape in a miniature form. So it kind of gives you the whole story. You see the tree, kind of get the idea that maybe
Cascading
it's growing.
down.
Yeah, exactly. And then you'd see, a miniature version of the landscape it came from.
They're just so peaceful to be around. I love bonsai. All right, let's get to the nuts and bolts of this. You said don't put them in your living room. You said you do overwinter them.
Yes.
So what's possible in Manitoba when it comes to bonsai, and what are the mistakes that you'd like people to stop making?
Well, so the biggest mistake is thinking that it's a house plant. And I guess in some ways you can kind of make them a house plant. The problem is that you're trying to keep them miniature. And if you have a plant inside, it's constantly going to be reaching for the sun. Even through, our North American windows, they're, kind of 3 panes, and they actually cut out quite a lot of light. The human eye is amazing, so it doesn't look like it's actually reducing the amount of light, but there's very little light actually coming through that window. So the trees stretch and reach constantly to get to the light, and that's kind of goes against what we're trying to do, is keep all of the branches short and the leaves small. So that's the first thing. But the second thing is that you have to kind of think about where the tree grows in nature, and then kind of utilize that as to how you take care of the tree. So again, this ficus comes indoors with me, goes under strong grow lights all winter long so that it can get what it needs through the winter. The tamarack, or our local species that we dig up locally, have to go into dormancy every winter, just like the trees around us, so that those trees all get buried in the corner of my yard in a snowbank for 6 months of the year. So.
Do you have like a little bonsai overwintering?
They do, yeah.
Spot.
So they all
if you've
go
got
in.
50, you must.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, this weekend, we can't run out of time here.
Okay.
So the event this weekend, the Bonsai Society of Winnipeg. First of all, how many people are part of it?
So we've got now, I think, just about 130 members.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And what are they going to be showing off this weekend? What can people expect?
So it's a good place to come and learn about bonsai and learn about the kind of the techniques and what it takes to grow bonsai, because we can encourage everybody in our membership to show something they're working on. So you'll see trees that have been in styling for 25, 30 years from, the guys that have been in the club for a long time. But you're also going to see trees that have just started their bonsai journey. They've just been kind of dug up out of the ground, and somebody's maybe put the first couple of wires on them and pruned them a little bit. and those people would be, new members, so they can explain to you a little bit about what got them into bonsai and what they've learned so far, and how they're,
Beautiful.
kind of progressing.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for making the effort to bring these specimens in. What's your just last quick question? What's the oldest tree in your collection?
I'd say the oldest tree in my collection is a tamarack. It's about 120 years old, I estimate. And the reason I kind of know that is because I dug up two at the same time. The other one perished, and I did cut the cross section and count the rings, and it was probably 130 years old. It was about the same size. So.
Gorgeous. What a lovely thing to have in a studio on a Friday morning when it's foggy and gray outside, a little bit of greenery. Scott, have a wonderful event this weekend.
Thank you very much.
That is Scott Samson. He's president of the Bonsai Society of Winnipeg. So their annual bonsai display is Saturday and Sunday, tomorrow and Sunday. It's at Norwood Community Centre. Entry is free. You can find all the details at bonsaiwinnipeg.ca.